Hello, and welcome to the Nashua Historical Society for this, our last program of the 2011 season. And we are delighted that you could all be here, and also that Becky Rule could be here. Becky is a very popular New Hampshire storyteller who has been doing this for a number of years, and a very prolific author who has written several books. Could Have Been Worse, True Stories, Embellishments, and Outright Lies. Heading for the Rhubarb. Live Free and Eat Pie. A Storyteller's Guide to New Hampshire. Becky has also authored several newspaper columns and does host the program on New Hampshire Public Television, the New Hampshire Author Series.
That's right.
Or close enough.
Good, that's exactly right.
You're going to have a good time, and sit back, enjoy, and get ready to laugh. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Becky Rule.
Thank you, Alan. Well done. Hello. Hello. How many of you have heard me before in person? Oh, a few. I recognize some of you. But I forgot all your names. It's how I roll. Well, I'm going to tell some stories. Can you hear me in the back, as they say at town meeting? And the fellow says, no. And the moderator says, count your blessings. So I'm going to tell a few stories and talk a little bit about the storytelling tradition, which is strong in New England, And in the tradition, if I tell a story and it reminds you of a story, you say, that reminds me of a story. And then you tell your story. And we bring you this microphone that doesn't actually amplify anything. It's just for pretend. Just like little kids, you just talk into it. You know, little kids do that. It's really for the TV because we're going to be on TV. That's right. So, all I ask is if you tell a story, make sure it's not too long, too boring, or too off color. I'm talking to you. One time at the Greenfield Women's Club, I forgot to say the part about off color. And a woman stood up and she said, Becky, I've got a story to tell. She had it all written out on a little piece of paper. She said, Becky, I've got a story to tell, but before I do, you should know my name is Estelyn Williams. I'm 98 years old, and my story might be a little off color. I said, Estelyn, you go right ahead and tell it, and she did, and it was. And they're still talking about it in Greenfield, New Hampshire. But she lived to be over 100 years old, and I think her sense of humor sustained her. What a wonderful woman. So if you tell a story tonight, I'm going to write a note about it down in my little black book and tell it in the next town, which is Gorham on Thursday. You like Gorham?
I have family there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got some Berlin stories, too.
I was born there.
You born in Gorham?
Born in Berlin.
Born in Berlin. Well, you know what they say. There's nothing like a Berlin girl. And you know what they call a mixed marriage up that way? When a Berlin girl marries a boy from Gorham. That's true.
It is.
I do not.
My grandmother was a Berlin girl and she married a Gorham man.
I bet something was said about that at the Thanksgiving table. They're still talking about it. What a culture shock. We were talking about Thanksgiving as just a couple of minutes ago, and I thought of a Thanksgiving story. Oh, this is embarrassing. My microphone just fell down my dress.
Tuck it in front of your pant waist. Or leave it like a pet.
I'll just pull it up. It's coming back. And this is all on TV.
said no off.
I know. I'll clip it to my little book or something. Oh, now I'm embarrassed. One time this happened, you'll edit this all out, won't you? No, they don't edit. One time I was doing a show with Fritz Weatherby over in Stratford, the Bean Supper show for Channel 9, and the same thing, something similar happened, and I said, hold on, I've lost something, and Fritz comes out, I'll help. Fritz Weatherby. He'll remember that. Where was I? Oh, I was going to tell a Thanksgiving story. So it's Thanksgiving, they've all had a wonderful dinner, and they bring the pies out, the apple pie, the pièce de résistance. And everybody gets a slice of apple pie, that's French, gets a slice of apple pie on their plate, and Mother, at the head of the table, sticks her fork in and takes a bite. She says, I must apologize. This apple pie is not as good as I usually make. And the daughter-in-law says, that's because I made it. Thanksgiving story. Kind of heartwarming. And we were talking about the old, I don't know if you saw it, but there's a lot of really interesting items in this historical society, including an Old Man of the Mountain bobblehead that you're not going to want to miss. We were talking about that, and we were recalling 2003. Franconia, New Hampshire, a bad thing happened. Gert called her sister Mildred. She said, Mildred, a bad thing has happened. Mildred said, what? Gert said, well, the old man fell down. Gert says, well, pick him up and call 911. But you couldn't pick him up, could you? He was gone for good. A week later, this is a true story, I was in New Boston, New Hampshire, and we were discussing the demise of the old man. Somebody said, you know, now that the old man's gone, maybe New Hampshire will need a new state symbol, and why not our very own glacial erratic? Do you know what a glacial erratic is? No. It's a big rock. The glacier came through and dumped these big rocks, and we name them in New Hampshire. The Madison Boulder is one. We love our big rocks. Well, this one was called Frog Rock because it looks just like a frog about to hop from certain angles. It's really tall. It's twice the height of this room probably. Great big rock. Looks like a frog. Said, well, you know, maybe Frog Rock can become our new state symbol. It'll put New Boston on the map. And somebody else said, if Frog Rock becomes our new state symbol, maybe we'll get a new state motto. Live free or croak. And I was there to hear that. And I wrote it in my little book. And I'm still telling that story because that's how stories get perpetuated. I almost said perpetrated, but that would be the wrong word. Perpetuated. Well, I've been thinking of a song lately that, to me, parallels storytelling. It's a song about songs. And the song is by Tommy Makem. Do you remember Tommy Makem? He's New Hampshire, we do. Well, he was a wonderful Irish folk singer. He was once on, what's that special show? You know. Ed Sullivan. Thank you, John. He was once, it's very important to remember things when you're a storyteller. He was once on Ed Sullivan with the Clancy brothers, Tommy and the Clancy brothers, sold a lot of records, lived in Dover most of his adult life, raised his family there. And he wrote a song. I won't sing it for you. You're welcome. But I'm going to tell you some of the lyrics. The chorus goes like this. Sing me the old songs of laughter and pleasure. Sing me the old songs of sorrow and pain. Sing from the heart. Sing of love without measure. The good times, the bad times, the sunshine, the rain. written and sung by Tommy Makem. Well, to me, stories are like that. They catch the good times and the bad times. You know, they catch the love. They catch the emotion. It's all about stories. And stories are our history. I have trouble saying that because of the way I pronounce my I's. I want to say stories are our history, but people look puzzled. Sometimes I say stories are our identity. People also look puzzled. I can pronounce my R's, but it hurts. I'm working on it. So I'm going to tell you a couple of old stories. This one has just gotten a new lease on life because we've been cleaning my mother's attic. And look what we found, and she gave it to me. Do you recognize it? It's a butter mold. Or the other night somebody called it a butter stamp, which is also true because on the bottom you can see the engraving in the wood. So, well, what happens is you churn the butter, or churn it depending on the kind of churn you have, and when it's about to solidify, you pour it into this butter mold or butter stamp, and then it does solidify. You can take it right apart, get the butter out, and then on top is a beautiful little design. Well, this story goes back to the Depression, and I call it butter bata. During the Depression, people didn't have much money, so they bartered. They traded hay for apples, or flour for cider, or whatever they had. It's a true story. A woman came into the general store one day, and she had a block of beautiful homemade butter. And she said to the storekeeper, on top of it was a little design similar to this, kind of like a flower, a daisy, the stamp marking the butter. She said, I would like to trade this block of butter for a block of butter. The storekeeper said, he looked puzzled, as you all do. The storekeeper said, may I ask why? She said, well, when I finished churning the butter and I had poured it into the butter mold, I looked into the bottom of the churn and there was a dead mouse. So I screamed and the kids come running and they saw the dead mouse and now they won't eat the butter. But she said, well, I figure what you don't know won't hurt you. Which is an old saying, isn't it? Well, the storekeeper said, I think I can help you. So he took the butter to the back of the store, and with a little knife he smoothed out those daisies and carved in some apples. He said, here you go, ma'am. You're right. What you don't know won't hurt you. And that's the story of the butter bata. I'm going to give you a couple more oldie stories and then pause to see if you've got a story or two to tell. This story goes back to 1894, when it was published in a book of old New England folk tales. So think how old this story is. It could go back to 1794 or even further than that. An old New England folk tale. But people don't change. It could have happened in Milford last week. People don't change. The story goes like this. There was a farmer in the spring of the year, and he was out in his field plowing with his big bay horse. He got the field about halfway plowed when, wouldn't you know, the horse dropped dead in the furrow. Something he'd never done before. And would never do again. Well, the farmer was, of course, dismayed. But he had an idea. He was what we call a Yankee trader. He got on his other horse and he rode 5 miles up the road to his neighbor's house. He said, Charlie, you know that big bay horse I got down to my place? Charlie said, I do. That is a fine work animal. The farmer said, how would you trade your white horse for my bay? Well, Charlie thought a minute or two, He said, you know, I would trade even. And they shook on it. And you know what that means in New Hampshire? The deal is sealed. Well, Charlie, the farmer says, I hate to tell you, but my big bay horse lies dead in the furrow. Charlie says, my white horse died 3 weeks ago. And its skin is hanging in the barn. And that's the story of the Yankee trader. Now this story, I think, is an old story, but not that old. And it's new to me. Always getting new stories. It never stops. It never stops. Dudley Loftman told me this story. You know Dudley Loftman? Anybody?
Yes.
Yes. Most people do. He's a fiddler. I was up in Ellsworth, Maine last week. Nobody knew Dudley Loftman. But we know him very well. Yeah, he's a fiddler from Canterbury. He's 80 years old. He's been calling barn dances since he was probably in his 20s, maybe 30s. Calls all over the state. Wonderful fiddler. And he told me this story also about a fiddler. Oh, I want to tell you Dudley's last book, one of my favorite titles for books. I have two favorites. One is John MacDonald's book. It's called A Moose and a Lobster Walk into a Bar. I love that. It's Maine stories. There's no story in which a moose and a lobster walk into a bar. It's just the title. But isn't it a great title? Wish I'd thought of that. And Dudley's last book was called, and this is tricky, this is Yankee humor, just under the surface. You're going to have to think about it. She plumb Ned, she mourn plum. What plum? There's this picture of a level on the cover, and plumb means straight up and down. I said that once and I was quickly corrected. That's not plumb, that's level. Plumb means that the beam is straight up and down. She plumb Ned, she mourn plumb. Get it now? Never mind. Sometimes you don't get it till the next day. Sometimes it's months from now. You get it. Are you a carpenter?
I play with wood.
See, there you go. He gets it. Mourn plum. You don't really want it to be mourn plum. You want it just to be plum. There you go. Where was I? Oh, so this story is from Dudley Loftman. It's about a fiddler in... One by one. Oh, I get it. See? I told you it'd come to you. Funny, isn't it? Yeah. The story goes like this. It's a fiddler up in Prince Edward Island. Well, he's a fiddler at night, but by day he's a lobster fisherman. And one day he's out in his boat with his mate, and he's hauling in a lobster trap when the rope catches around his hand and slices off the end of his finger. As the blood is dribbling down, he looks at his finger and he looks over at his mate and he says, "There goes B flat." I love that story. That's a Dudley story. He's a great storyteller and poet and fiddler. Now this story, I've told it now 4 times and nobody's laughed yet, but I don't give up. Because I think this is I think it's a sweet story. It's a true story told to me by Allison Snow. And she said when she was a little girl, she would visit her uncle on Peaks Island in Casco Bay in Maine. And he taught her all about lobstering and fishing, and he had a dory boat, and they had just wonderful memories of her summers with her uncle. But she says, I remember the first time I visited Peaks Island. She said, I might have been 3, 4 years old, just a little girl, and my mother let me out, and I was on the beach, and I was running around, and I was playing in the water. After a while, my mother comes, and she says, Allison, what do you think of the ocean? And Allison said, "It's salty, Mama." Thank you. I think that's a sweet story. It's Salty Mama. Because it's the understory. Somebody said to me, what makes a good story? And a good story, I think, is one where you fill in the blanks, where the story ends and you're still thinking about Shemore and Plum. And you're still, if she says it's Salty Mama, you go back. What's she been doing? She's been drinking that. I don't know what she's been doing, but she found out that. That's the understory that I think makes for a good story. So the other story is over in Auburn. I go to Auburn every year to the Historical Society. They have a potluck supper, and then I tell stories. We have a wonderful time. The same people come every year. So I have to come up with some new stories sometimes, although mostly they forget them year to year, so that's okay. But I love going there. And the other day, we were talking about a character I'd never met, a man named David Jenkins, who's been gone for many years now, and they started telling David Jenkins stories. They all remembered David Jenkins. And somebody said, David Jenkins went to New York City once. No. Yes, he did. And when he come back, you know what he said? He said, Auburn is just like New York City, only not so crowded. So that was his impression. And I always try to try out at least one story I've never told before, and this is it. Sometimes it doesn't go that well. But a man told me just this week, he said that we were talking about kids and the stories about kids, and he said his little boy came home from school, and he was all excited because he was about 9, 10 years old. He's all excited because they had a visitor to school, and it was a man who had served in the Vietnam War. Was a veteran of the Vietnam War, and he told him all about it. And the little boy said, and he was shot down right out of a plane with his parachute, and he landed in the snow, and then he had to wrap himself in his parachute to keep warm, and he wasn't rescued for 3 weeks. And Dad said, I don't think that's quite right, because Vietnam is a warm country. And the little boy said, oh, it must have been during the Cold War. Isn't that cute? That's my little story. Must have been during, quick little boy, the Cold War. I often tell stories about the hurricane of 1938. Because anybody who was in New England during the hurricane of 1938 remembers it well. And I've just collected a couple of news stories about the hurricane of 1938. The one that started it off, and I like to show this, this was a story sent to me by mail in an envelope from Via Jenks of Piermont. She'd been at a session, and she thought of the story about a week later. So she mailed it to me. And inside is a half sheet of yellowed math paper, torn across the bottom. Via probably needed that piece of paper for a list or something. We're frugal. We're a frugal people. And across the bottom in ink, she'd written, "This was something my mother had." And on the math paper, in very light pencil, is a story from her mother from the hurricane of 1938 in her mother's own handwriting. It's a treasure. Yeah. Goes like this. In the hurricane of 1938, an old farmer arose and began to dress. "What you doing, Elma?" his wife shouted from their bed. "Dressin'," he said grimly. "This house may soon be blowed clear to the village. How you're going is your business." "I'm a-going in my pants." This next one is really a story about stories. I like to tell stories about stories. It was up at Indian River School, which serves the towns of Dorchester, Orange, Canaan, Enfield, and Grafton. That's my little memory test. As long as I can remember those 5 towns, I'm okay. I made it another night. Yes, close one. And I was at the junior high, middle school, and we did an oral history project. We sent the kids out into the communities, each into their own community, to collect stories of the histories of their towns. And they did a great job. They used tape recorders and wrote them all up and turned them in. And then we took those stories and made a play out of them and presented the play to the community. Everybody came, especially the ones that were interviewed, because they wanted to know what we had done with their stories. And I'll never forget, there's a little boy in the front acting. I think it was a staged reading, so he was reading. He hadn't memorized it, but he was up there acting. And he said, "My name is Richard O'Day, and I remember the hurricane of 1938. Oh, he said it was a big blow. He said it sounded like a freight train going down the road in front of our house. That's how strong the wind was. He said during a lull, we thought it was a lull, my brother and I sneaked out on the back porch for a look at the lake. And a gust of wind came across that lake so strong, we had to grab a hold of the iron railings and we were flapping in the breeze." And from the audience, in the middle of the show, comes a voice, the real Richard O'Day. He says, "Yeah, that's just the way it was." And I love that moment because time folded in on itself. And there we all were together during the hurricane of 1938, brought together by a memory and by a story. One more hurricane of 38 stories. I got it from George Arushan. Some of you might know him from Nashua. Yes, yeah, not Arushan. Does that ring a bell with anybody? I was recently down here with the Nashua Boys and Girls Clubs. They were having an event to honor the donors, the people who had donated, and George was there. And after the program, he came up to me and he said, "I've got a story for you about the hurricane of 38. I got out my pencil. I'm ready. He said that he was a little boy during the hurricane of 38, and his father, who had immigrated from Syria, his parents came from Syria, and had set up a barber shop on Tremont Street in Boston. And it had a big plate glass window. And when the hurricane came, of course, nobody knew it was a hurricane. They just, the weather kind of sneaked up on us. Dad was there with little George, and a church across the street had a slate roof, and the wind was pulling those slates off the roof and flinging them like frisbees at the plate glass window. So George's dad got out there with a broom, and as the slates were flying towards his window, he'd whack them. And he saved his window. When they got home, Mother said, "What was little George doing all that time?" Little George was right beside me. He had a little broom of his own. That's a hurricane of 38 story. I pause now to see if anybody is reminded of a story. And if you are, we'll bring this important microphone out to you so you can talk into it. Is anybody reminded of a story? You know the rules. Not too long, not too boring, and not too off color. He's got a story. And what, do you want to stand up so people can see you? And what's your name?
Frank Mellon.
Frank Mellon?
Yep.
Hi, Frank.
A couple of months ago, my granddaughter was visiting from Chicago, and we went to the supermarket together. And she was off looking for something else, and I went to the meat counter to pick up a roast. And my granddaughter is in her 30s, a tall, attractive blonde. So after she finished looking, found what she was looking for, she came back to the meat counter. In the meantime, the butcher said, "What kind of a roast are you looking for?" I said, "I don't know, my wife ordered it." So just then my granddaughter came walking up. He said, "That's your wife?" She said, "You're my hero."
That is a very good story. That was a very good, and well told. And well told. We all need these little perks in our lives, don't we? You got to be somebody's hero. Thank you. Does anybody else have a story to tell? There'll be other opportunities, but I just pause here. Because what usually happens is towards the end of the program, when everybody wants to go home, that's when you think of all your stories. One time I was in Deering, New Hampshire. I'm just reminded of this because there was a pause, sort of like this one. I said, doesn't anybody here have a Deering story for me? Fellow in the back said, well, I guess I do. I said, well, go ahead and tell it. He said, well, fella run for selectman once, unopposed, and he lost. Years later, I was having lunch at the Barley House in Concord. Very nice. Their squash soup is excellent. And with Peter Beard, who's the road agent in Deering, and J.P. Marzullo, who's one of the selectmen. And I was interviewing them, I've got a book coming out on New Hampshire Town Meeting, so I was interviewing them for that book. And so I said, now I heard a story. Tell me if it's true. So I told them the story, and they said, oh, yes, it's true, but there's more to it. I said, no. They said, yes. They said, and JP said, the story really goes like this. Incumbent run for selectman once, unopposed, and he lost. I said, how did that happen? And Peter said he pissed off the road agent. See, stories kind of build. You know, town meeting the one day a year when everybody's a road agent. Love town meeting, love town meeting. Well, I'm moving on a little bit to the notion of truth, which I think in storytelling is important. Of course, in the New England tradition, whenever we begin a story, we say, this is a true story. It happened to me last week with my granddaughter. At the grocery store, I was at the meat counter. We don't know if that's true or not. He could have just been making that up.
I would never do that.
No, and we always say that too. No, this is a true story. I wouldn't lie to you. A fellow said to me once, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a professional liar. He said, are you in the House or the Senate? Quick. So this is a story that I had been telling for several months. Man told it to me, said it was a true story. I'd been telling it for several months when a fella said, that story's a lie. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, because there's a lie in it, and if there's one lie, there's more than one lie. So I'm going to tell you the story and see if you can figure out what the alleged lie is. Heard it from Doug over in Langdon, New Hampshire. You know Langdon, New Hampshire? Over towards Walpole. That part, I call it the heart of darkness. Have you been over there? There's all these windy roads through the woods, and there's no signs. Hills, valleys, rivers right beside the road. It rains a lot. Anyway, it's lovely. But it's hard to find your way around, I'm just saying. So Doug told me this story in Langdon. He said, actually, he was out one night over in the next town over, which is Ackworth. Thank you, John Rule. I was going to get it. I was getting there. Dorchester, Grafton, Enfield, Orange. I got it so far. So, you have to know the name of this story is Priorities. Sometimes titles matter. So he was over in Ackworth, Doug was, in the middle of the night, driving around 9:30. I don't know what he was doing over in Ackworth in the middle of the night. I didn't ask him, none of my business. But he said he came around a corner and he came upon a terrible sight. There, a car had gone off the road, had flipped over in a ditch onto its roof. The wheels were still spinning and steam was coming out of the radiator. Just happened. Doug parked his car. He got his cell phone out. He called 911. He said, there's been an accident out here. You need to send help right away. He ran over to the car. He had EMT training, Doug did. So he looked through the window at the upside-down car, and sure enough, there was a man hanging upside down by his seatbelt. Doug said, are you okay? The man said, no, I was just in an accident. That always makes me laugh. What people say makes me laugh. I laugh every day, the things people say. So Doug gets the door open upside down, which is difficult. And he gets the man released from his seatbelt and lays him gently down on the ground. And they can hear sirens in the distance. Help is coming. The man motions Doug to come closer. So Doug leans down to the man, and the man says in a kind of a weak voice, could you help me with something? And Doug says, well, I will if I can. The man says, well, he says, my shoulder hurts bad. I know they're going to take me to the hospital. And my car's all stove up. I know they're going to tow that away. In the back seat of my car is a watermelon. It's a honker. Could you get in there and get that watermelon and keep it for me until I can pick it up from you? Well, Doug said, I'll try. So he goes to the back of the car, and he gets the door open upside down, and sure enough, the watermelon is now lying on the ceiling of the car, intact. The lights are coming now, so help is almost there. Doug crawls into the back seat of the car and gets his arms around that honker of a watermelon, and he's beginning to tug it out when he hears a voice from the front seat of the car. Hello? It's the man's wife. And that's why I call this story Priorities. Now, did you detect anything that might be construed as a lie? No, of course not. Well, the fella said, I know there's a lie and this is it. He says there's no cell phone service in Ackworth. So I call it the miracle of the watermelon. So that's a story of Doug and the watermelon. Language is of great interest to me, and my newest book is called Heading for the Rhubarb, a New Hampshire Dictionary, well, kinda. And it started, actually, my publisher asked me to write this book. John MacDonald had written one about Maine, a Maine dictionary. And so he said, well, there should be a New Hampshire dictionary. So, of course, I've been collecting sayings and words since I was a little kid. I just loved them. I mean, I love them. I write them down. I listen for them. So this was a natural for me. So I spent a couple of years sort of getting things together to write this book. And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples from it. And maybe it'll trigger some language for you, or some old expressions. Like somewhere in here, there's an expression that I got from Jenny Brown. It's in the S's. Sick abed in the wood box. Do you know that expression? Sick abed in the wood box? Well, in the olden days, Jenny said that what happened was she went to her doctor, and he said, how are you, Jenny? She said, I'm sick abed in the wood box. And he looked puzzled. So she said, I could tell he wasn't from around here. She's from Gorham. Jenny's from Gorham. Sick abed in the wood box, when kids were sick, and you had just a wood stove, a kitchen stove, you'd take the little kid and put him all snugly in the wood box, because that's the warmest place in the house. So if you were really sick, you were sick abed in the wood box. Expressions like that. Now here's a word. I won't tell you the word, I'll tell you the story, and then you'll know the word. Story goes like this. Up in the Lakes region of New Hampshire, there were all these tourist cabins, you know, you'd rent out, maybe 10 or 12 of them, and the tourists would come and rent them, and they loved them, little tiny cabins. But they went out of business, so the owners were going to sell the property and sell the little cabins and the contents. They had an auction. to sell off the contents. And of course, all the locals went, because who doesn't love an auction? And they were bidding like crazy, because you could get curtains for $1, slightly used. You could get a bedspread, beautiful, for $1.50. They were selling those lamps, the bedside lamps that have the base, which is a deer leg with the hair still on it, and the hoof. Selling those for $3.50. I said, gosh, I'd like one of those. A fella said, you should get 4. And have a set. I'm feeling sensitive because I know you went hunting last week and didn't see any deer.
Don't bring that up.
But you could get one set of those lamps and then make you feel better. Those little hairy legs. To get 4 legs. No, just one deer, that's all it takes. Well, they were selling he didn't get a deer last week. I felt bad for him. They were selling toasters for $0.25 a piece. Can you imagine it? No? Percy bought a toaster for $0.25. He was all shiny. He was looking it over. His friend said, Percy, that's an awful nice toaster. The only thing is it's got no cod. Percy says, that's okay. I got no electricity. Cod. A delicious white flesh saltwater fish. Great for chowder. A measurement for wood, spelled C-O-R-D, but pronounced cod. It's 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet of stacked wood. And it's what you use to plug an appliance into an electric outlet, a cod. This is a very educational book. Well, the next entry is coffin. And I included that because my friend Arthur Slade told me an old saying. A coffin, of course, can be a casket for burying the dead, or it can also mean expectorating. Yeah. So the old saying is, it was not the cough that carried him off, it was the coffin they carried him off in. Isn't that a great one? It was not the cough that carried him off, it was the coffin they carried him off in. Have you ever heard the one, I've had ample sufficiency? Anything more would be anathema to my delicate constitution. That's another one. Lady said that one time after Thanksgiving dinner, a big dinner, she said, has everyone had ample sufficiency? And the little grandson said, I didn't know there was any. Ample sufficiency. We eat what we can, and what we can't, we can. That's another one. I love those sayings. Anyway, with each of the words, I try to have a little story. So this is the story that goes with coffin. It's what I call apocryphal. That means it's an extra big lie. But it may have been true at one time. Mother was a little hard to get along with, so when she died, the family had mixed feelings. They laid her out in the coffin in the living room, and the boys loaded the coffin onto the sledge for transport to the cemetery. Yankees are a morbid people. We enjoy a morbid story. Unfortunately, the sledge got away from them, slid fast down the hill, and banged into the big pine tree at the bottom. The coffin popped open, and Mother sat up alive and sputtering. She lived another 15 years. Even harder to get along with than before. Well, death comes to us all, and once again it came for Mother. They loaded her into the coffin, loaded the coffin onto the sledge, and headed for the cemetery. At the top of the big hill, Father said, hold tight, boys, and mind the big pine tree. That's coffin. It's a morbid story. It's a morbid story. Does anybody have a story or a saying to tell? I'm ready. Yes. Here's a special microphone. It's special.
can hear me, I think.
Well, it doesn't amplify. It's just for pretend.
It's just a little story.
Okay, it's just a little story. Just hold on to that. It's for the TV. That's what it's for. It's not really just for pretend. Okay, and tell me your name again, because I know you already told me.
Judy,
Judy.
we were getting ready for lunch, and we told my granddaughter to go in and wash her hands. Well, she went in and washed her hands in the bath, and when she came out, she still had soap on.
Yeah.
And we told her to go back in and rinse the soap off, and she went in and rinsed the soap off. The bar of soap.
The bar. That was good comic timing, Judy. She went in and rinsed the soap off. The bar. It's all about timing. It's all about rinse the soap off. The bar. Well done. Well done. You did. We all know what she meant. I think. The ones that don't will understand tomorrow. It'll come to them. Did you understand? Oh, she got it immediately. She got it right away, so you're doing well. You're doing well. It is a lot about timing, and I sometimes have stories that actually it makes me laugh a lot. I'll tell the story, deliver the line, and it's just blank. And it's usually about timing. It's usually about too fast, too slow, or not the right rhythm. You know, the story stands, but if you don't deliver it with the right timing, sometimes you get that stare. One time a lady said, "Is that it?" I said, "Yeah, that was it." But it really is timing.
That's a true story.
We understand this. I've explained this already, Judy. It's very clear. It's very clear. Well, who knows about Bert and I? Bert and I. Most of you do, Bert and I. They were, some of you don't know about Bert and I, but it'll come back to you. Have you ever heard the expression, "You can't get there from here"? Alan asked me if I was going to say that tonight, and I just did. You can't get there from here. That's Bert and I. You know, how do you get to East Vassalboro? Don't you move a goddamn inch. That's Bert and I. The story, I've adapted the story, but it was originally Bert and I. They come back to me all the time. People will say, "This is a true story," and they get to the end, and I think, Bert and I. Bert and I, who was Bob Bryan and Marshall Dodge, two Ivy Leaguers, not from Maine, but who loved Maine, went along the coast of Maine and collected stories from the lobstermen and from the islanders and from the fishermen and from the natives. And they put them together in a record in 1958 called Bert and I. They were simple folk. And then they put out another record called More Bert and I. And these records sold many, many copies. They were very popular. And so what I say about them is they did not invent Yankee humor, but they made it accessible to a lot of people. They popularized it. We do have a particular kind of humor in this part of the country, and Bert and I made other people know it. Of course, we all loved it, because it was the kind of humor that we heard at home. You know, it's the kind of humor that we know in our families. So they published their first record in 1958. In 2008, my publisher, Island Port Press, brought out some of those stories on CD for a new generation. And they said, you know, we want to launch this CD with a big celebration. What'll we do? So we'll get together a bunch of storytellers, and we'll have them tell nothing but Bert and I stories for a whole afternoon. Where will we do this? At L.L. Bean in Freeport, Maine, the mothership. So one beautiful summer day, we went up to L.L. Bean in Freeport, Maine, the mothership, and it was me and Tim Sample, John McDonald, Kendall Morse, and who's the other? Oh, Fred Dodge, who was Marshall's brother, and Bob Bryan, who was the original. Marshall died, unfortunately. So we were all there, and we were telling Bert and I stories all afternoon. Huge crowd. We had to do it twice because so many people came. And what I noticed was people in the audience were mouthing the words to the stories. They knew them better than we did. They knew them by heart. And that taught me something about stories. It taught me that there's something rather wonderful about knowing a story, about hearing it again. It's like hearing a song that you know again. And I hadn't really believed it till that moment. Although one lady said to me once, "Becky, I don't mind when you tell the same story. That way I don't have to wonder how it's going to end." And there is something to be said for that, taking these stories in and making them part of your life, of your vocabulary. I mean, you all have maybe a poem or a song that you hear certain times of the day, and you carry it with you. So I'm going to tell you a Bert and I story in homage. That's French. Maybe, I don't know. In homage. And I'm going to tell it about twice as fast as they would have told it because we don't have enough time. And I'm going to try to tell it in using their technique, which is the true Yankee technique, which I have not mastered, of the dry humor. This is where the teller keeps a straight face, does not smile, does not indicate that he or she has any idea that what she's saying is funny. Dry. I shall do my best. I'm doing my, now see, you're good at it. You've got that dry look. You're good at it. He's good at it. He's got that look. He's got that Yankee look. Are you from Vermont? Maryland. Maryland? My goodness. I always say Yankees are not born, they're made. Well done. Well done, sir. I know I can usually spot a Vermonter because they've got dry down to a science. I had a fella sit in the back of the hall 3 times. I was doing stories along the Connecticut River over maybe the course of a year, and I recognized him. Sitting in the back of the hall through the whole session, never cracking a smile. So after the 3rd time I went up to him, I said, "I noticed you've been sitting in the back of the hall for 3 sessions and you never cracked a smile." He said, "I'm a 5th generation Vermonter. We don't." And it was true. It was true. It was a true thing. So this is a Bert and I story told in the Bert and I style. If I can pull it off, I'll do my best. It's called The Body and the Kelp. Professional. Bert and I were clamming on the beach. We spotted a body in the kelp. We didn't recognize the face, but we thought it might be old John that runs the lighthouse, so we walked down the lighthouse and we knocked on the door. Old John hollers down from the window. He says, "What can I do for you fellas?" We said, "John." We was down on the beach clamming. We spotted a body in the kelp. We thought it might be you. John says, "Was he wearing a red shirt?" He was. John says, "Was he wearing blue trousers?" Yeah. "Was he wearing rubber boots?" Yes, John, he was wearing rubber boots. Was they the high boots or was they the low boots? They was the low boots, John. John says, "Are you sure?" Come to think of it, they was the high boots rolled down low. Oh, John says, "It wa'n't me then." That's Bert and I. Does anybody know a Bert and I story they're ready to tell? So many of them. One of my favorites is, and it's been adapted, and it comes back to me once in a while, but as a true story. But it is a true story. Some people from Massachusetts to our south. We're kind of close to Massachusetts right here, aren't we? Yeah, I call it the Deep South. Some folks from Massachusetts had never been to Maine. So on a Sunday, they took a ride up to Kittery, Maine. And they went to the Kittery Trading Post, and then they went across the store to the Weather Vane, across the street to the Weather Vane, had a nice lunch. And they thought, you know what? We got some time, we can go all the way to Portland. So they were in the parking lot of the Weather Vane, and they had what we call a map. It's made of paper, folds, and we used to have them. They had unfolded it on the hood of their car, and they were looking it over, and a local comes walking by, and they said, "Could you help us?" So he shuffles over. They said, "Now we see here on this map we can take Route 1 up to Portland, or we can take I-95 to Portland. Does it matter whether we take Route 1 or I-95? And the local says, "Not to me, it don't." See, that's Bert and I. Oh my goodness, we're running out of time. I'm just getting started. Does anybody, I'm going to do a grand finale, but does anybody have a story to tell?
I've got a similar story.
Oh, well, let's hear it. Wait, here's your microphone. Yeah, it works. He can hear that. Just see the guy in the back with the earphones on? He's like,
A fellow was from New York,
from New York.
yeah,
Yeah,
driving on a country road.
yeah.
He went by this old farmhouse. And on the porch was an old guy rocking in a chair.
Yeah.
So they stopped and said to him, "Can you tell us how to get to whatever?" And he said no.
No.
So he said, "Well, have you lived here all your life?" He said, "Well, not yet."
Well, the conversation went on, He said no. He said, "Do you know how to get to East Vassalboro?" He said no. "Well, do you know how to get to, to get to I-95? No. Well, do you know how to, do you know which way is south? No. You don't know much, do you?" And he says, "Well, I'm not the one that's lost." That's the complete story. Lived here all your life? Not yet. We're an optimistic people. Does anybody else have a story to tell? I got a few. Yes, thank you. Wait, you need your microphone.
I'm not sure how funny this is going to be,
It
but
doesn't have to be funny.
it has to do with my brother.
Your brother. And what's your name?
My name is Judith.
Hi, Judith.
Hello. He and my mother, well, he was very, very young, toddler, and being Protestant, he'd never seen a nun.
Uh-oh.
So they're getting out of the car, doing the annual, winter or the fall clothing run to Jordan Marsh, which was a tradition.
Yes?
And as they're walking in, down the walkway a little ways, a nun in the full black garb gets out, and in the voice that only a toddler can do, "Mommy, is that a witch?" And my mother quickly, "William, don't say that," hushed him, and they went in and did their shopping. Well, it turned out that the nun ended up right behind them in the checkout line.
No.
And apparently she had heard my mother hush him, so she looked down at my brother with a big smile and said, "Hello, William."
And William was never the same. Oh, that reminds me of so many stories. So, hello, William. Hello, William. I was in the Burlington Coat Factory one time. And there was a little lady there, an older lady, and she was walking around. We were looking at things, And in comes a man, tall man, very, very black, very dark, and very handsome with a suit on. He looked great. And the woman looks at him and she said, "Are you from Nigeria?" He said, "No, I'm from Manchester." Kind of like William. "Are you from Nigeria?" Yes, Judith?
Tell the story. It's always William, never Will or Bill. He was
Right.
in first grade, and the teacher said, Bill, sitting right in front of him. And some little kid in the back row said, "I think you mean William." She said, "William goes right here."
Oh. And what does he do now?
He's a manager for a lighting company, and he flies to Hong Kong 3 times a year for me.
William has done all right for himself. William has. Well, we are approaching the witching hour. 8:30. I try never to make people sit more than an hour because it's just not right. But I think I'm going to give you 2 stories to finish up. One is, you reminded me of it. And the other I haven't decided yet, but I will. This story I call a community story. I heard it in Potter Place, New Hampshire. And I call it a community story because when Gracia Snyder stood up and told it, I could tell that just about everyone in the room already knew it. It was a story about Woofy George. Woofy had been dead many years when I heard the story, and the story goes back to when he was 3 years old. So stories are a kind of immortality. I call it Woofy George's first words. And it's what? A true story, Frank. It's a true story. When Woofy George was 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, he never spoke. He never uttered a syllable. People thought maybe there's something wrong with young Woof, but other people said, no, he's got 4 older brothers and sisters. They talk constantly. Woofy doesn't need to talk. Well, one day, the brothers and sisters were at school, and Woofy was home alone with Mother. And Mother was going to make a pot of beans in the Glenwood stove. Do you know those old Glenwood stoves? Great cast iron beasts with an oven and a firebox and a lot of what do you call those things on top there, round? Lids, burners, lids, thank you. Language is important when you're a storyteller. That's how I remember. And she was going to make a pot of beans in that Glenwood stove, and Woofy was hanging around, just a little boy, 3 years old. And she got a fire going in the wood box with some kindling and some newspaper, and it was crackling away. And she went to the wood pile to get a chunk of wood, or as they say in Berlin, a junk of wood. Got a junk of wood to put in the wood box, but it was a little bit too big, a smidge too big. What are you going to do? So she takes the lids off the top of the stove. You can do that on those stoves. They've got a lid with a little piece of metal in between. Take it right off, and you can access the wood box from the top, which is what she did. And she shoved that chunk of wood into the wood box as hard as she could. And it went in about halfway and stuck. She couldn't pull it out. She couldn't push it in. And that's when the flames began to lick. And that's when the smoke began to fill the kitchen. And that's when Woofy George, 3 years old, said his first words. He said, "'Twon't go, Ma, too goddamn big." William. Little William. Well, this last story is also about stories, and you'll know when you hear the end of it. But I received a wonderful gift last winter from a woman named Heather Pike from Barnstead, New Hampshire. She sent me a tape of her grandfather, Warren Angus Wilbur of Seabrook. Warren Angus Wilbur had made this tape in 1973 when he was in his 90s. And he was telling stories of his life. And on the tape, it's just an audio tape, you can hear him tell the stories, and you can hear the family say, "Grandpa, tell the one about." "Grandpa, do you remember the time?" And they're sort of correcting each other. It's a wonderful tape, about an hour long. So I'm going to tell you a Warren Angus Wilbur story to finish off our evening together. Before I do, thank you for telling stories, and thank you for laughing. It's salty, Mama. Salty. Warren Angus Wilbur loved nothing more than to go to Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, with his best friend, Razor True. They would make the journey from Seabrook to Pittsburgh in the middle, which is about as long a trip as you can take in the state of New Hampshire. And they would do it in the middle of the winter because they loved to ice fish. And Razor had a little cabin up there in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. And one winter, They went out looking for a good fishing hole, and they were on a back road, off a back road, and they looked and they saw this beautiful pond they had never seen before, but it looked just right for pickerel. Not too deep, you know. Not too deep, not too big, just right for pickerel. So they unloaded the truck. They didn't have an auger. They had a chisel and an axe, and they went out to begin to dig their first hole in this pond. The ice was a foot and a half thick. Well, that was all right. As they were working, I'm going to tell you the story. That we'll leave them working, chipping away with their axe and their chisel, taking turns so they don't get exhausted. Unbeknownst to them, this pond had a history. A few years before, the loggers had come into this wooded valley and they had clear cut. Now, this was in the winter when the snow was about most logging goes on in the winter. Snow was about 4 feet deep. So when they cut the trees, they didn't dig down to the base of the tree to cut it. They cut it where it lay, 4-foot stumps through this whole valley. Well, that was okay. The beaver moved in and they dammed up the little brook that went through the valley and created this pond about 5 feet deep, just covering those stumps. Well, that was okay. And then this winter, the ice froze nice and thick, and the beaver moved out, and the dam broke, and the water drained out of the little pond, leaving just this 1.5 foot of ice sitting on top of those stumps. Do you have the picture? Frank, this is a true story. Well, that was okay. So they got their hole punched through the ice with considerable effort, and they looked down and there was no water. This was a great disappointment to Warren Angus Wilbur and Razor True. However, they looked down the pond and a couple of other fellas had seen them out on the ice, and they had the same idea. So they were making a hole at the other end of the pond. Well, Razor had a thought. He slid through his hole, and he crawled the length of the pond. And just as those fellas finished making their hole and pulled back the chisel, Razor popped up. They said, "What are you doing?" Razor said, "Well, I drowned it a while back, and this is the first chance I've had to get out." And in the background on the tape, you hear a little voice. I think it was William. And William said, "Grandpa, is that a true story?" And Warren Angus Wilbur said, "Yeah, well, most of it." Thank you very much for listening.
Becky, thank you very much. That was really terrific and a really wonderful way to end our 2011 series. And please come up if you're interested in any of the books or tapes that Becky has for sale. And before we go, I just wanted to introduce the president of the Historical Society, Bill Ross, the curator, Beth McCarthy, and also members of the board of directors, if you could just kind of raise your hand to be identified. Okay. And also, all of you, thank you very much for coming. All of the programs here at the Historical Society are free and open to the public. And get to know us. I think you'll like what you find here.